Let's take a look at early explorers at Giza. In fact, we can go all the way back to ancient times. Remember, the Giza necropolis is most famous for the Old Kingdom or Pyramid Age, so roughly 2500 BC or so. But there's activity a lot later. In fact, in the New Kingdom, some of the pharaohs returned to Giza. And this aerial photograph of the Sphinx shows you a little temple off to one side, angled and oriented right towards the Sphinx. That's actually a New Kingdom Dynasty 18 temple. Remember, the Old Kingdom dynasties 4, 5, and 6. Dynasty 4 for the Giza pharaohs. So this temple was dedicated by the warrior king, imperialist pharaoh Amenhotep II. And in it, he erected a very large round-top stela talking about what an athletic pharaoh he was and how he used to love to ride his chariot all around the Giza necropolis. He clearly revered the place. And in fact, he wasn't the only one. His son did something very similar. If you walk in between the paws of the Sphinx today, you'll see another stela, the so-called dream stela of Thutmose IV. And in this case, I'm showing a photograph of the Sphinx quite buried. You have to imagine it like that back in the 18th dynasty. Why? Because in this stela, Thutmose IV is a prince, and he talks about wandering around Giza and taking a nap, and the Sphinx appears to him in a dream, and basically says, "I'm all covered in sand. If you will dig me out, I will make you pharaoh." And he did. And he did. So Thutmose IV erected this stela, the dream stela, and it still stands. Interesting to note that he probably used a large granite block taken from Khafre's pyramid complex to make the stela. There are lots of visitors, of course, in between this, and time rolls on, and we get to the 5th century BC, and the Greek historian Herodotus, who comes to visit Egypt, his ears are filled with all kinds of stories, some of them quite kooky, like this one in particular, where he's told that no crime was too great for Cheops, that's Khufu, builder of the Great Pyramid. When he was short of money, he sent his daughter to a brothel with instructions to charge a certain sum. She asked each of her customers to give her a block of stone, and of these stones, the story goes, was built the middle pyramid. I don't believe it, and you shouldn't either. Another visitor is in 60 BC, Diodor Sicilийский, and he reports that the Giza pyramid casing is intact. That's important to remember, and this photograph shows you the beautiful white limestone outer casing blocks still intact on the lowest course. These come from across the Nile at Tura, beautiful quarry area there. And you have to remember the pyramid was originally completely covered like this. You couldn't climb up it. It was smooth, it was white, it was blinding. So in 60 BC at least, all of that was still intact. Most of those blocks were removed to build medieval Cairo much, much later. But the big turning point is probably the age of Napoleon. So in the 1790s, he comes to Egypt, ostensibly to liberate the country, but of course he had other political agendas in mind as well. Militarily, it was a catastrophe, and Lord Nelson and the British smashed his fleet off the coast at Alexandria. But for our purposes, this expedition was actually quite successful because Napoleon brought a whole second army of savants, scholars and others ready to study everything about Egypt, the flora, the fauna, the antiquities. They went to Giza, they made measurements, and they published huge elephant folio volumes called La Description de l'Égypte. This is what started Egyptomania in Europe and the fascination with the country. And a little stela found in the Delta by Napoleon's men, but then brought to England as part of the war booty, and now in the British Museum, is known as the Rosetta Stone. This, of course, was the key to cracking the code, deciphering Egyptian hieroglyphs. That was done not by an Englishman, but by a Frenchman, Jean-François Champollion. And now we're off and running. So that happened in 1822, and we've actually got the ability to read the Egyptian texts. Other explorers came to Giza as well. We have Giovanni Caviglia from Genoa. He was a mariner, and he worked for the Englishman Henry Salt, clearing various aspects of Giza. He also cleared the area in front of the Sphinx, where Thutmose IV had his dream and set up his stela. He also worked in the lower chamber of the Great Pyramid of Khufu. Another very colorful character is Giovanni Belzoni, who was a circus strongman of all things, came to Egypt to work on various hydraulic projects, but got interested in antiquities. And before you know it, he was entering the tomb of Seti I in the Valley of the Kings and working in the second pyramid at Giza of Khafre. He entered the burial chamber, and if you doubt it, just look at the giant graffito he left on the wall there. It's still preserved. These Westerners were not the first to enter these pyramid chambers. We do have Arabic graffiti and other textual evidence, but they certainly left records behind. Another one was the Englishman Howard Weiss, who worked all over the site at a rapid pace that would horrify us today. And some of these people, unfortunately, used dynamite to get into some of the pyramid chambers. Weiss is most famous for working at the third and smallest pyramid of King Menkaure. That's where George Reisner would focus so many years later. And inside, he found a fantastic niched stone sarcophagus of Menkaure himself. He thought it just wasn't safe to leave it inside the pyramid, and so he decided to send it to the British Museum. This was 1837. And on board the ship Beatrice, unfortunately, there was a storm and a shipwreck, and that sarcophagus is now at the bottom of the Mediterranean somewhere. There have been attempts to find it, and I can't wait when it gets located to see all the different claims on who actually should own this famous sarcophagus.